Thank you again for tuning into today's webinar. I will now hand it over to Castle's Regional President, Fiona DiDomenico.
Thanks, Shauna. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Fiona DiDomenico, Regional President with the Castle Group. Appreciate you guys taking some time out on your Friday afternoon to join us. And I wanted to tell you just a little bit for those of you that don't know about Castle. We are a Florida-based company, and we specialize in associations like yours, I'm sure, either condos or HOAs. And we kind of specialize in associations that have staff on site. We have a couple of different departments at Castle. We have full HOA, condo, lifestyle, food and beverage division. So we have pretty much everything under the sun that you could possibly need. We are here to help and here to serve. So if you have specific questions for us afterwards, feel free to shoot us an email at info@castlegroup.com, and we'll be happy to follow up. So again, thanks for your time today. And I wanted to introduce Monique and say hello. Good afternoon, Monique. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Fiona. Thank you very much. How are you today?
You're doing great. Thanks for being here. I was hoping you could kind of tell us a little bit about yourself and your company, and then we'll kind of jump right in.
Happy to do so. For those of you that are participating today and you have not met me before, my name is Monique Parker. I'm one of the founding partners of the law firm of Rabin Gurley Parker. Excuse me, I just told you the wrong name of my law firm. Rabin Parker Gurley. I just gave Adam Gurley a promotion unintentionally. I gave him my spot.
He appreciates that.
he's probably really thrilled. Hopefully he's not watching today. But Rabin Parker Gurley, our law firm has been in operation for several years now, and like Castle Group, we specialize in the representation of community associations. We represent communities all throughout the state of Florida, condominiums, homeowners associations, mobile homes, cooperatives, and we really enjoy working with communities and management companies like Castle Group. So I'm very thankful for the invitation to participate in today's webinar. I actually think the subject matter is very interesting, especially because there's very little law or legislation that gives us guidance on it. And it's also extremely important to our communities and individuals in general. So I think today is going to be a great afternoon of information sharing.
Excellent. Well, thanks for being here. We really appreciate your valuable time. And so we're going to kind of chat a little bit today, right, about phase 3 and what does that mean for all of us, and especially our board members who we know it's been a tough, oh my gosh, what is it now, 6 months at least, tough go. So yeah, and we have hopefully some snowbirds getting ready to come back, into town and coming from all different parts of the country potentially. And we wanted to chat a little bit. So I think maybe we'll just jump right in. Monique, can you kind of give us from a legal standpoint, phase 3, like what does that mean, if anything,
Sure.
for those of us on boards right now?
Sure. So in the easiest terms that I can put it, so, there have been a mind-boggling number of executive orders. And if you try to trace them all through, you'll drive yourself somewhat crazy. But there's really 2 executive orders relating to COVID-19 that are essentially at play right now. That is Executive Order 2052. That was the first executive order that declared a state of public emergency. That is the health crisis order that is still effective right now. However, we reasonably believe that it's not going to be extended past November 3rd. We'd like to see it extended, but it's unlikely. Especially in the face of the other controlling executive order right now, which is Executive Order 2244. That's the most recent one, and that is the phase 3 executive order. What 2244 does is it essentially eliminates all of the prior executive orders, the stay-at-home orders, the phase 1, the phase 2 orders, the essential services orders, all the ones that we've been familiar with for so many months now. So it supersedes all of those. And in short, it says, look, the state of Florida is open for business. And there's very little that individual entities and local governments can do to impose greater restrictions onto the companies doing business. There are some restrictions that local communities and governments can impose, but they can't close businesses. They can't require certain types of conduct any longer. They can't limit occupancy to any major extent. And all of the misdemeanor type sanctions that were in play previously for not following any proposed orders, or excuse me, any of the orders, are also lifted. So, you know, individual companies such as your local supermarkets and, you know, privately owned and operated businesses can still impose their own rules and restrictions that they want to have to protect their employees and the individuals that do business with them. But as a governmental mandate, there's really not much in place any longer.
And Monique, so how does that affect us? Because, you know, I travel a lot across the state going to all of our different communities, and I notice as I go from county to county, you know, some of the businesses have the signs on the doors that say, you know, you must wear a mask to enter the, you know, the gas station or the 7-Eleven, whatever it may be. And then others, no signs. And so a lot of our boards are asking, can we still require, you know, a mask in the clubhouse, for example? What are your thoughts?
Right. So if you think of the state's action, the governor's orders as an umbrella that oversees all of our local ordinances and then private individuals, the umbrella that we have over us basically now says, you know what, you guys can do what you want with certain limitations. You can't be overly restrictive against restaurants. You can't mandate closures. You can't do this or that. And that's what they're saying to governments. To privately held businesses, and this is where communities would fall into place, because don't forget, communities are corporate entities. All of your associations, you have the INC at the end of your association name. That means you're a corporate entity, a private business in a sense. And so you can still have your own rules and regulations. So the way that we as legal counsel to our communities are interpreting this is, you still have the same bundle of rights that you had before COVID even became an issue. If you rewind the clock back to January of this year and even into February, because really COVID kind of hit the headlines in March and April. Back then, you still had the right as a community association to enact reasonable rules and regulations under the governing documents of your community to protect the health, safety, and welfare of your residents. That right still exists, and that's what you need to operate under at the present time. And actually I'm going to caveat that just a little bit, because until November 3rd, we do still have the declared state of emergency in place. And as long as that declared state of emergency is in place, there are emergency powers under the Condominium Act, the Homeowners Association Act, and the Cooperative Act that all give you an additional bundle of rights. But because we think that's really only going to be in play for the next 2 weeks or so, I'm really focusing now on post-November 3rd and what we're going to expect is going to happen then. So, you know, with that little window of time here, if you want to do some extra things, you still got a window opening. But once the declared state of emergency is gone, you still have the right to adopt reasonable rules and regulations. The big problem is going to be determining what is reasonable under the law. And without that umbrella of state action saying that this should be closed and there should only be so many occupants in certain businesses, we don't have that guidance for what's reasonable, which means that the burden is on you as directors and officers for your individual associations to make some tough decisions and to do what you've been elected to do and to run your community in the manner that you deem is best to protect the residents in your community.
You know, and it's a great point, because what I'm seeing is we might have, you know, let's say 5 communities within a 5-mile radius that are all similar, but they don't all have the same rules. And, right. A resident might say, well, how come the clubhouse is open, you know, across the street or down the street or at the YMCA or whatever it might be, but it's not open here? And it's really, I think, important for our boards to recognize that it's not, a brush stroke of one size fits all. It really is, community specific. You know, what if the community had a recent cluster of people that, reported to the management office that they had COVID, for example? That's, a whole different set of circumstances that the board has to look at. Do you agree with that kind of approach?
Absolutely. And other factors are the general age of the population in the community. If it's a community for for persons over 55, then that's going to be a factor that's going to weigh into it, because very likely there's going to be more at-risk individuals residing in the community. How much money the community has in general, because if the operating account isn't going to be able to fund extensive cleaning and maintenance and trying to keep up with that, that's going to play a factor in it as well. Whether or not the community is self-managed or they have management staff on site. There's so many different factors that are going to play into it. And as Fiona said, of course, if you have a number of confirmed cases in your community, then you know that there's a greater risk. So you have to really look at everything in its entirety when you as a board are trying to make those difficult decisions.
Okay, so as what I hear us saying then is really the phase 3, the what now, the answer to the $1 million question is, if the board is organized and has rules in place and have documented the implementation of those rules, at a board meeting, they can still have restrictions in regards to the safety and well-being and how they're going to operate in their clubhouses if the clubhouses are going to be open. So I think that's clear for our audience. And if it's not, please chat your questions in. We are looking at the questions as they come in, and we'll try to give you some more specifics if there's something you want to know. One of the questions that did come in, though, Monique, is talking specifically about events in the clubhouse. And it was a question, I think, around bingo. Demands to start, giving bingo in the clubhouse, or I guess really any activity in general that is really, I'm going to assume HOA sponsored. And by that, I mean that the HOA, employees are putting the event on. What are your thoughts in regards to that?
So to kind of back up a little bit, as we were talking about, all of your rules and restrictions are going to have to be reasonable. And, unfortunately, the word reasonableness is how lawyers make their money, right? And so even though we're saying, yes, go ahead, you have the right to adopt these restrictions, because you've always had that right even before COVID, only if challenged can a court or an arbitrator decide whether or not they think what you've enacted as a rule is reasonable under the circumstances. So, everything we say here today is kind of in theory and what I can tell you based on my legal opinion. But when we get to that specific question as it relates to bingo, I'd like you guys to think about things in 3 separate categories. You have vested property rights as it relates to the use of your units, your homes, your dwellings, and accessing and that property, what you can do with your own property that you hold and that is on your deed. Then you have the appurtenances to your property. Those are, if you're in a condominium or even a homeowners association, your pool area, maybe you have a gym facility, a clubhouse. Those are appurtenances to your unit. You don't actually have a deed to that. That's something that is shared, but it's appurtenant to your unit. Then you have activities such as bingo and social clubs and things that are sanctioned by the association and allowed to be operated and conducted within the appurtenances to your unit. That last group of things, to me, is the lowest on the level of importance, and I can't imagine that a court would require you to begin providing those types of activities and luxuries under the current threat. So I would really have no problem with any of our associations just saying, look, we're not hosting any type of activity like that, because the liability is very real. And when you're doing something like that and hosting an activity, you're actually inviting people to come in groups to be together on association property where guess who's liable? You are. You're liable for what takes place there. You're liable for the cleanliness there. You have the duty, a non-delegable duty, to make sure that that premise is safe for its intended use by the occupants. So if you're hosting a bingo game, how could you possibly ensure that it's safe for those residents to come on in groups of people? Even if you did encourage social distancing and the wearing of masks, you still can't really ensure it. If you wanted to allow it, I mean, you're taking an assumptive risk, and you would have insurance hopefully to cover you for taking that risk. But to think that an owner could demand that you provide those services, I would say absolutely not. I would take that case all day long and not have any qualms about saying, no, you're not going to provide it.
Yeah, and we feel for the board members on the call because we know how passionate people are, for lack of a better word, on both sides of the, both sides of the equation. And what we're seeing, what I'm seeing from a real life management standpoint is most associations are not doing events that are hosted by the association.
Right.
They are.
No, I think there's too much risk involved in doing that. If I was counsel to the association, I would recommend against hosting events at the present time.
Yeah, and what I am seeing is, especially outdoors, if the clubhouse, some clubhouses are open and they are, having posting signs, for example, as you walk into the clubhouse. And I'd love to get your opinion on that. Signs versus people signing an actual waiver. I've seen both discussed. Do you have thoughts on that?
I do. So when we're talking about appurtenances again, the use of amenities that are actually pertinent to your unit. So you're in the middle group of homeowner rights. So it's a little bit more protected than the services, but not quite as protected as the actual ability to freely use your own dwelling. So with those appurtenances, there are a lot of different avenues that associations are trying to take to prevent, or I should say protect, the association board and the association as a corporate entity from potential liability. And all those steps are good. But let's start with the release, because some might think that getting individuals to sign a release in exchange for being allowed to use those amenities and those appurtenances is the strongest protection. Actually, it's not. In our opinion, the release is really not worth the paper that it's signed on. And you really can't require somebody to sign a release to use something that they are already entitled to use. So the hassle of doing so is not worth the benefit of actually having that release. As I said, you have a non-delegable duty to maintain a safe premises for your residents and the guests of your residents, if you're allowing guests. And so whatever you have them sign as a release is not going to get you out of the liability to maintain that premises. So how can you maintain a safe premises? Well, I think there's two things, and this gets to the signs. One, communication, and two, policies. So I'm actually going to work backwards and start with policies. Policies, what I mean by that is first sitting down and adopting those rules that we talked about in the beginning. What do you think needs to be done to protect the residents? Are you going to limit the number of people that can be in a given area at any particular time so that social distancing can be maintained? Are you going to ask people to sanitize the areas after use? What are you going to impose as reasonable restrictions on those areas? So that's part of it. The second part is, what are you as an association going to do to protect that area? And in our opinion, one of the very best things that you can do is to adopt, adhere to, and publish a cleaning schedule. If you do that, then and the court will know if you're ever challenged, that you've taken reasonable steps to maintain a safe premises and you've adhered to those steps. Whether that cleaning only takes place once a day, twice a day, several times a day is going to be dependent on how much money that you have as an association, how much flexibility you have with personnel in order to maintain the cleanliness standard that you adopt. But by doing so, by adopting the standard and by setting out your cleaning schedule, you're now taking affirmative action to put something in place that is going to be adhered to in an effort to protect the residents. Then once you adopt that policy, you communicate that to the residents, whether you do so by sending out a communication to everybody via newsletter or email blast, or posting it as a sign in the areas where the cleaning is taking place, or a combination of all those things. What that does is it not only notifies your residents that you are taking steps to ensure a safe premises, but it also lets them assume the risk of use. They know that maybe that area is going to be cleaned at 10 a.m. every day. If you're doing that, and they want to use it at 10:30, well, maybe their risk is minimized. If it's only being cleaned at 10 a.m. every day, but it's open till 6 p.m. and they're using it at 6 p.m., Well, the risk might be heightened at that point because now the area has been used by several people, but they're aware of that risk. And that's something that a court will take into consideration if you're ever challenged or you're ever sued for, somebody contracting COVID as something they claim as a result of failure to maintain a safe premise. So that whole communication process is very important. And along with posting, any cleaning standards that you've adopted, something simple and to the point, stating that the association is not a guarantor of the safety of residents using the area and that they're doing so at their own risk is something that can be very effective. Again, it doesn't relieve you of liability for maintaining a safe safe property, but it does shift that burden if you're ever challenged. So a combination of policy and communication is the most effective means by which the association can protect itself in the event that somebody tries to sue you because they believe that they've come down with the virus based on, something lurking in the property.
Right. Okay, great. And that's clearly hit a chord because we have a ton of questions that have come in all around resident use. So I'm just looking at a couple of them. I'm going to try to summarize because some of them are very similar. And really the gist of the question is, I think they're saying, okay, so they understand, let's use the clubhouse as the example. Clubhouse is there. And we've got, signs on the door. We've done e-blast to the residents telling them what the rules are and, when it's going to be cleaned, et cetera, et cetera. But now the questions are saying, okay, well, that's great from an association standpoint. We understand probably not the best route to host association, events. But what about if a homeowner wants to host a function? Is the association still liable?
Okay, so in that situation, I would say, even where we have homeowners hosting functions absent COVID, in that situation, we typically do require a release. And I think that you should seek counsel and ask for a release because the association would be responsible for making sure that the, let's say we'll use a clubhouse because that's the best example. For making sure that the clubhouse was clean and sanitized prior to turning it over for an individual use by a property owner. But once that occurs, then you can't be held responsible for what goes on during that private use of the clubhouse. So, and it's the same exact liability that you would have even in a non-COVID threat. You have premises liability if they're using alcohol on the property. You have premises liability if somebody trips over a chair and falls. All that is customary and, an assumption of risk that you have no matter what, COVID or non-COVID, and your insurance should cover all of that. Now, the tricky thing with insurance is, of course, now, insurance isn't really prepared for a pandemic. So you probably have exclusions that your insurance company is going to try to use if you're ever sued for, somebody getting COVID and alleging that it was, through unsafe premises. But it really doesn't change your liability as it relates to an individual use of the clubhouse. So if you're going to allow individuals to use the clubhouse, or again, any other amenities, we're just using the clubhouse as an example, then I would absolutely say that you should have a release, and the release should have a COVID-specific addendum. If you already have a general release in place, talk to your attorneys and get something written up and make sure you have an indemnification provision. And you can even require that homeowner to obtain event insurance for the purpose of using the facility. Now, I really cannot say with any certainty whether or not insurance companies have gotten up to speed where they can offer coverage for a viral threat under event insurance, but they certainly can cover other types of injuries. So, I would investigate that for certain.
Yeah. And I can tell you, I share with the audience, for the most part, not everyone's not the same, but for the most part, associations at this point in time are not allowing, the birthday parties and the wedding venues at most of the clubhouses. They're really, the clubhouses that are open, they're trying to keep it to a minimum as far as, traffic in and out of the clubhouse. And so they're, at this point in time, most of them are not allowing. The next questions that we have, I'm going to group together, is really around, okay, so we dealt with sort of the individual parties per se. What about if just, you know, a bunch of residents want to come up, and this would be more like the groups or the committees, maybe it's the, you know, the euchre committee or something that wants to come and play cards by the pool. Association is not organizing it. It's not, you know, an association event, but again, the association is allowing it. I can tell you what I'm seeing in the communities for the most part is the boards have established very specific rules around what parts of the clubhouse are open, the hours that they can be open, what the seating capacity can be. So if it's cards, for example, it's card tables, they've put the tables together, but they're socially distanced. They've put, you know, X's through the tables where you can't sit. So the associations have done as much as they can reasonably to set the venue up so that it's quote unquote, you know, socially distanced and as safe as possible. But I think that's what this question is about is that wise to do, and what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I absolutely think it's wise to do. And that gets to the policy and communication that we were talking about before. I think that, you know, limiting the number of persons that can use an amenity that is now open, setting up the facility so that, you know, social distancing is easy to observe because of the way that the furniture is arranged, you know, posting signs that only X amount of persons are, you know, permitted to be in the area at a given time, cleaning schedules, all of that, absolutely important and permissible, I believe, under the current state of affairs. Again, that's something that I feel as counsel to an association I could defend all day long. Now,
right.
That being said, what do you do for enforcement? And I'm guessing, I don't know if you can nod your head, but I'm guessing that was probably the second part of the question. It's great you adopted all these
Funny
policies.
you should ask.
Right. I'm a mind reader, among other things.
Yes, you're very good at this, Monique. You're very good.
So yeah, enforcement's a big problem because so what happens if you've done all that the association can do to protect itself? You have, you know, X marks the spot, you've taken chairs away, you've done everything, yet you have a group come in and they're clearly not abiding by the social distancing restrictions. You don't know if it's one family or just multiple people. And so what do you do as an association? Well, the first thing that you can do, but you must be very, 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 very careful about, is you can gently remind people that, you know, the rules are in place for their protection and ask them to abide by that. If you get the, hey, go pound sand response, which you very well might, then as your counsel, I would advise you to politely say, okay, and walk away. You do not have police authority unless you, of course, have a security guard, and then you can ask your security guard to intervene to the extent he or she is permitted by their charter. But as a director or agent of the association, you should not, under any circumstances, get confrontational with somebody that is not abiding by the rules. You should not get into conflict with them. It's best to simply walk away. If you can identify the persons or parties that are involved, then that's something you can get to your management for violation letters and to, you know, remind them of the rules and regulations, and you would enforce them as you would any other rule and regulation. And then again, here lies the next problem. We all know that enforcement of rules is challenging even under the best circumstances, because if you're a condominium, you have to deal with the arbitration process. If it's a homeowners association, you have the statutory pre-suit demand for mediation that you have to comply with. Cooperatives also are under the arbitration procedures. So this is not a quick process, right? And if they ignore the demand letters that you send and they continue with conduct using the amenities without social distancing and doing all these things, then you'd have to take them to court. Well, we all know that by the time you get through any of that, you know, hopefully, I really, truly hope, knock on wood, that, you know, the pandemic is going to be over, especially since our courts are now completely clogged up because they've been closed and not handling hearings for a long time. So it could be a year before you get to any type of resolution. So the only remedy you're really left with is fining. You can impose fines for violation of the COVID-19 restrictions that you impose against your homeowners. You still have to give the notice requirements under the statute. You still have to allow an opportunity for a hearing. And, you know, with regard to condominiums and cooperatives, you know, fines are difficult because you don't really have a great mechanism for collecting them. And, you know, if it's a single incident, you know, you're talking maybe $100 unless your documents limit it even more. So you're really just going to have a fine that you impose on your books for $100. In a homeowners association, you can impose a fine that will, you know, eventually accrue up to $1,000 for repeated incidents, but it's only $100 per incident. So they're going to have to violate 10 times before you get to $1,000, at which time you can lien for that. So really what I'm saying is, honestly, there's no really good enforcement mechanism. You know, it's unfortunate, but true. There's, you know, I wish I had a better answer for you guys, but aside from fining, there's not much you can do. Send the violation notices though. And the reason for sending the violation notices is what we like to say, protect the innocent. The association can only do everything you can do to protect yourselves as directors and as a corporate entity. So as long as you're taking reasonable steps to enforce the rules that you've put in place to protect your residents, that's the best you can do. I'm sorry, there isn't a better answer for that.
Yeah, no magic bullet, unfortunately, but I always tell my boards too to think about it. Whenever we have a COVID-related issue that comes up, what's worked well for me and my team is to think about, okay, well, what would be a similar situation pre-COVID, you know, and we got talking about this the other day, and it was like the old, you know, someone's got glass at the pool. You're not allowed to have glass at the pool. Right. So if someone's at the pool and they don't, or in the clubhouse and they don't have their mask, what would the appropriate, you know, thing be? Well, have some extra masks, you know. If it was glass at the pool, we would bring a cup to them and say, hey, could I put your beer in a cup for you? And, you know, if you don't have your mask on, hey, do you mind if we know we've got a fresh mask here? Would you mind putting that on for us, right? Don't assume the worst is kind of where I'm saying, and there's a way to try to approach it from a service standpoint.
Right. And
we've got, let's see it.
I was just going to say, you know, it's unfortunate, but, you know, it's not a nursing home. It's not a school. You can't guarantee the safety of individuals that want to act recklessly. You know, there's just not a whole lot you can do there.
Yeah. And then we have a whole bunch of questions that came in regarding, it looks like, indoors versus outdoor events. I think they're asking really about, does it make a difference if the event is outdoors versus indoors? And, you know, we always go back again to CDC guidance, and certainly the CDC has said, you know, if you're going to have, you know, a group of people, it's certainly better outdoors than it is indoors, right? It lessens your risk. And so we have lots of associations who have chosen to do events outdoors, still socially distanced. We still have rules in place. It's still publicized what the rules are, and we ask people to keep socially distanced, but we are having some success with that. And so I would say, yes, it does make a difference if it's indoors or outdoors. There's less risk, theoretically. Now, if you pack, you know, 200 people into a small area outdoors, that just because it's outdoors doesn't make it good, but you still have to socially distance. Yeah. Okay, let's see. What else do we have come in? We've got some now. We should probably jump to number 4 on our agenda, which is rentals. I'm seeing lots of questions coming in regarding can we require people that are coming in from out of state to quarantine? And I know when COVID first kind of hit in March and April, the governor had put in place certain restrictions regarding if you were coming from certain states. All of that has expired, I believe. Can you kind of speak to that and what your thoughts are?
Yeah, all of the mandatory quarantine orders have either expired or been superseded by 2244. So there's really no authority that you're going to be able to rely on to require somebody to quarantine. You can certainly ask. You could, you know, make it a policy, but quite frankly, you know, now we're getting into that more restrictive bundle of rights, the free use of property. And so you're going to have a much more difficult time regulating how and when somebody can come and go from their units. And quite frankly, as much as I hate to say it, you know, Florida is a more at-risk state than people coming from other states now. You know, we're more of a hotbed than many of the other states. So it's going to be very difficult to mandate that a homeowner or unit owner coming from another state quarantine within their unit absent any indication that they have symptoms of the virus. Now, let's say somebody does have symptoms. Again, you're in the same situation that, you know, you would be anyways. You can certainly ask that individuals, you know, out of respect for others, quarantine, but there's no authority that's going to allow you to require it. And even if there were, you still don't have the police power to require it. So there's not a whole lot you can be able to do there.
Okay. And then we had a couple of questions come in regarding elevators and how to manage distance with, you know, it sounds like they've only got one elevator. And from a best practice standpoint, pretty much across the board, I'm seeing this in most of our towers, and quite frankly, even in the commercial areas, whether you're in a commercial building or a hotel, it's normally 2 people per elevator if they're not in the same family. So if you have a mom and a dad and 2 kids, they can all get into the same elevator together because they're living together. But otherwise, 2 people per elevator is pretty much what we're seeing across the board. Let's see. We've got a question about seasonal residents. Can an association be held liable for employees testing positive for COVID-19? Well, that's an interesting question. Yeah. What are your thoughts on that one?
So if an employee tests positive, right, there's negligence. Okay, I have to kind of bring it down to a basic before I get into details. So really what you would be held liable for is negligent conduct, right? Negligence requires duty, breach, causation, and damages. The duty part is easy. You definitely owe duty to your members to act reasonably at all times. If you breach that duty, if you're not acting reasonably, and it has to be a direct cause of damages. So you have to have some foreseeability associated with a breach of duty. In other words, you would have to know that an employee has COVID, or you would have to have reason to believe that they've recently been exposed to COVID or the virus in order for there to attach some sort of liability for an employee having it and then spreading it. You can't just assume that all employees are at risk and, shut down your practices, right? If you have a manager on site, you have a manager on site. If you have maintenance people on site, you're not going to send everybody home and let everything, go to heck because you're afraid that you might have some liability. There would have to be foreseeability associated with an individual employee possibly having and transmitting the virus. So here's a good example. If you have an employee that's exhibiting signs of the virus, they're coughing, you have a policy of taking temperatures when people come onto the property, when your employees come onto the property, which is a good policy to have. We check the temperatures of all of our staff members when they enter the office. So if you have a policy and you have an employee come on and they have a temperature and you let them come to work anyways, if you see them looking under the weather or they're complaining about being under the weather and you let them continue working on site, that's foreseeability. That's when you can run into some potential problems. You have a duty to send that employee home and tell them not to come back for, until they either show that they've tested negative for COVID or they've quarantined for 14 days. So that's what we've been advising all of our associations that have on-site employees to best protect themselves is, again, that policy. Have policies in place to manage and monitor your employees. Make sure they're healthy. Make sure they're not coming on site with a fever. Make sure nobody's coughing. And if you see any of those symptoms, then tell them to leave and don't let them come back until you're reasonably assured that they don't have the virus. Another good example is if you have an employee that goes on vacation and they've been traveling and they've been on an airplane or on other types of public transportation for the purpose of their vacation, or in hotels, then maybe you might want to ask that employee to refrain from coming into work for an extra couple of weeks when they come back. So foreseeability is the key when it comes to employee-related liability.
Yeah, and we're also, we have a lot of protocols at Castle, around the whole, what if an employee gets infected? So if you have specific questions on that for those people watching, you're welcome to reach out to us at info@castlegroup.com, and we'd be happy to forward along some of our best practices. And the reverse of that, I think, is true as well. You want to make sure you're protecting your employees, right? So making sure that they've got the correct PPE at their disposal at all times, and that they're not being put in harm's way, by residents. We've had to be very careful in the setup of the offices at all of our sites, because most of our sites have teams on site, and restricting, when residents can come in. We want to still provide a very high level of service, but we want everybody to be safe including the team, right? Especially our
Yes.
teams, because they have to run the property. So
Actually, Fiona, I'm so glad you brought that up. That actually reminds me, you are so right about that. We already have one association. I can't believe I didn't think about bringing this up earlier. We have one association that has been sued under OSHA, Occupational Safety and Health Administration, for failing to provide proper protection to an employee. So, and we're dealing with that right now and defending the association under the OSHA administrative complaint. And it got even uglier. I'll spare you all the details, but that is extremely important because you are, as an association, bound by that. You have to make sure that your employees are safe as well. Great point, Fiona.
okay, excellent. So I think we're going to jump into rentals for a little bit because I've got quite a few questions, and again, I'm going to try to merge them together. So a lot of the towers would have within their property a suite that is an amenity that the residents can use to rent, to have their families or whatever stay in it. And the question really is one, should we be allowing that amenity with COVID? And two, if we do, how can we possibly, make it safe per se? So I'll let you handle one, should we even do it? And then two, I have lots of protocols around keeping it safe. But what are your thoughts, Monique, on allowing that particular amenity? Oh, did we lose Monique? I think we may have lost her. So while we're waiting for her to come back, you have to love technology. I can tell you, as far as the particular question that actually came in was asking about, cleaning the unit and dishes in the unit. And do we have to, oh, welcome back.
So I had an internet blip. I saw my screen go crazy, and then I had a moment of panic and thought, oh my goodness, please let me get back on this quickly. I did it.
I'm so impressed.
I didn't have to call IT. I'm so proud of myself.
There you go.
So sorry,
so
but I did hear the
just,
question. So.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so go ahead, because I was going to give them some thoughts on cleaning, et cetera. But what do you think about even offering, having that amenity available in a COVID world right now?
Right. So I would say that, again, this is it's kind of in between these services and amenity kind of buckets, right? So if you can, I would say maybe try to avoid renting it for as long as possible. Unless you're getting extreme pressure from residents to still be using that amenity, I would try to keep it closed. Now, let's say that you don't want to, or you really are getting that extreme pressure. It's similar to what we were talking about with allowing an individual use of the clubhouse. I would contact your council, and I would have a release made up for individuals that are using those rental units. But again, I keep coming back to this because I just can't make this understated at all. You are still responsible for the safety of the premises. So if even with a release, if you have them sign a release and say that they're going to hold you harmless for anything that happens within the unit, you have to make sure that it's clean both before and after that use. So I would say that you need to go above and beyond the common and customary cleaning protocols. Make sure that you have a company that is very familiar with the CDC guidelines for cleaning and the products that are supposed to be used, and that the unit is sanitized to the very best of your ability. Instead of just trying to do it yourself, have a company come in and do it. And yes, above and beyond is the best that I can say if you're going to allow it. But I would say, try to not use it. Again, one of those things that I would happily defend on behalf of an association is their decision not to open that for use at the present time until further notice. But if you're going to, the cleaning is going to have to be above and beyond what it ordinarily would be. And
great,
add the release.
thank you. And yeah, with the release. And then from a dishes standpoint, we were saying, don't even have dishes. We're seeing this in all of the, most of the hotels, they're using paper, which obviously is more expensive, but safer for the short term. So that's what we would recommend. So Monique, I think we should probably jump into the whole annual meeting and board meetings because we're about, we got about 14 minutes left,
Okay.
and this is a big topic for people.
Yep.
So really the million-dollar question is, I think for one, I think there's a little bit of a misconception out there that people are saying, well, I can't have my annual meeting because of COVID. And I know you have some specific thoughts around that. Do you want to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is one more time where I'll actually reference the declared state of emergency, because until November 3rd, if your annual meeting would have fallen between now and that time, or, you know, it's your normal annual meeting date was during the period of the declared state of emergency, you do have some significant protection, because those emergency powers that we were talking about under 718, 719, and 720, the Condominium, Cooperative, and Homeowners Associations Act, all give you the ability to cancel and delay meetings because of a state of emergency. And there's even been case law during the pandemic that has actually ruled that the viral pandemic is a state of emergency that would apply under those statutes. So until November 3rd, if you've delayed your annual meeting based on that, then you're pretty much in safe territory. However, you don't have to. You actually can hold your annual meeting. You can hold it exactly the way that we're holding this webinar today. You can hold it by, you know, a combination of means, some in-person attendance and some video attendance. It's really, you know, being creative in the best manner possible in order to protect the residents, but still do business as a community. With regard to elections, that's a more complicated matter. If you're a condominium association, you know that you have to conduct your elections by the inner and outer balloting system, and you have to have a committee that's appointed to, you know, count the ballots. One of the things that we're recommending is, you know, that you still maybe have your annual meeting via, you know, video conferencing, Zoom, or other web capability, and that the election, you can appoint your election committee prior to the meeting and have them ready to go, set them up in an area where they can appropriately social distance from one another, and set up a camera and record the entire balloting process, the opening and counting of ballots by that committee. And that's going to be satisfactory, in our opinion, if there's any challenge to the election process, you know, under the COVID state of affairs that we're in. So there's a multitude of means by which you can still host an annual meeting and an election. I know Castle has conducted annual meetings and elections in a number of ways during the COVID pandemic. Our office has assisted with several annual meetings and elections. So it's just about contacting either your management or your legal counsel and asking them to help you navigate the best manner by which you can do that for your association. But you don't have to cancel them. You can have them.
Yeah, and I would say all of our associations are full steam ahead. Board meetings now, you know, are very regular, and it is a combination even for regular board meetings. Some boards, if they have large scale facilities, you know, a part of the board will meet in the amenity room, and a part of the board will Zoom in, and they kind of take turns deciding, you know, who's going to be in attendance in person or not. And then for our annual meetings, a lot of our associations that don't have, you know, a grand ballroom, they've made the decision to go rent, for example, you know, a church during the week. And, you know, that can accommodate 300-400 people, knowing they're only going to get, you know, 50 or 60 people type of thing. And they're giving people the option. You can either Zoom in or you can attend in person. However, they're making it very clear up front how many people the room will accommodate, the venue will accommodate for social distancing, you know, that masks are required. And, you know, that is really how they're doing it. And knock on wood, so far, so good. We are making sure when there are elections that, as you mentioned, whoever, you know, is counting the ballots, that the camera from a Zoom standpoint is showing that while it's happening, so that's live on Zoom. So people have a comfort level that there's, you know, no funny business going on, and just try to get everybody comfortable with sort of the new normal, because Zoom is wonderful, especially for people that are out of town or, you know, couldn't get to a meeting in the past. It does give some more, you know, opportunity for people to be involved in the community, which is great. So
yeah, it's an adjustment for sure, but you know, I think that's, I guess you could call it a silver lining of this whole pandemic is, all of us are learning to use technology in ways that we may not have before, or at least, becoming more comfortable with doing so. And, even today, as you can see, we've adjusted to allow almost, actually, I think it's over 100, Fiona, attendees that we have here today, by, allowing questions to be submitted in advance, which is something that you can also do with regard to your meetings. Let your homeowner submit them in advance via email or however you like, so that you have them there. And just like we're doing now, if you're using the Zoom platform, people can, submit questions during the meeting, and you can have somebody jotting down those questions and presenting them. So maybe it's not ideal, but it's definitely workable.
Yeah. And so just a few more questions that have come in around this. One specifically says, can elections be postponed during COVID-19, say for 6 months, and let the incumbents on the board continue for a while? I think what I heard you say was under the emergency order, possibly that could have been okay, but it's about to expire, we believe.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I would not do that past November 3rd. Right now, if you've been doing that under the declared state of emergency, you do have a little bit of wiggle room. But, assuming that the state of emergency is lifted as of November 3rd, you're not going to have that protection anymore. And, even with it, I think that if it goes too long, you're going to start seeing people challenge the authority of the board to stay in place, because there are other ways to conduct an election. So, that's the time's going to quickly run out on keeping the same directors in place without an election.
Yeah, and of course we haven't talked about it, but electronic voting is becoming more and more, popular as people get more and more comfortable, using technology. We've seen a big tick. Every year it's been growing regardless of COVID, but certainly this year there's a great interest in doing electronic voting as well. So that's another avenue to consider. Another question that came in is, let's see, what happens if masks are required at an in-person meeting and someone does not wear one? Can they be turned away? So it sounds like someone's walking up to the door to sign in and they don't have a mask. We talked about, having extra masks and asking them to put one on. But if they refuse, what is your guidance there?
Yeah, I think you can ask them to leave politely, but if you're allowing in-person attendance, and somebody absolutely refuses to leave, and they walk in, getting back to that police power, you don't have the authority to escort them out. You cannot get into a confrontation with them, and arguably they're going to be able to assert the right to be there. So and I think that's some of the risks that many of our associations are trying to balance when deciding whether they're going to allow some in-person attendance and some Zoom attendance. If you're allowing in-person attendance at all, you have to be prepared to deal with individuals that either come in without a mask, refuse to wear a mask, take the mask off because it's hard to hear. That's something that we've dealt with, where people can't understand what others are saying because the masks are on and they take them off. So you have to be prepared for that. And I think the social distancing is actually going to be your best answer to that problem. You ask people to wear a mask. If they don't wear a mask, then, you really try to insist on social distancing by keeping chairs apart and doing your best. But you're not going to be able to forcibly remove somebody that wants to attend a meeting at which you are allowing in-person attendance.
Yeah, and again, I can't emphasize enough, you never want to risk harm to yourself as a board member or have an employee, put themselves in a position where you're, a physical altercation with anybody, whether it's over a mask, social distancing, or having glass at the pool, right? That's just common sense. So that's a good segue into the next question, which is regarding enforcement. Following appropriate notice, can boards suspend privileges for specific individuals who refuse to cooperate or follow the rules, i.e. prevent them from, using the clubhouse because they've not, we've seen them, 3 times now and documented 3 times that they've not worn their mask?
Right. Actually, I should have mentioned that when we were talking about enforcement before. Just like fining, you can absolutely suspend use rights, and you do it in the same manner. You know, you have to have the notice and, you know, go through all of the same steps that you would for imposing a use restriction for any other violation. But yes, you can impose use restrictions for violation of COVID-related rules.
Yeah. And so that was perfect because you answered the next question without me even asking it, which is, do you have to confront to document before fining? So the answer, so yes, just like any violation, you need to, you know, have good records and follow the process. The last thing you want anyone to do is feel like they're being targeted, etc., treated differently. You want to treat everybody the same.
You treat it,
okay, we're running out of time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Let's see, I'm just scrolling through really quickly these questions because I want to make sure we get as much as we can.
While Fiona's scrolling and looking for any other questions, I do want to mention one thing about the masks that further complicates it. As if it's not complicated and muddy enough, right? I'm going to throw one more thing at you. And you might have already
Why
seen
not?
This. Right, exactly. Let's just make
lay it
on
us. Lay it on us, Monique.
Let's have some fun today.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the Fair Housing Act, as if it's not challenging enough, right?
Oh,
so,
Monique, nail in the coffin.
Right. There are individuals who have respiratory disabilities that are exempt from the mask requirements, and you cannot harass those individuals. So getting back to, you know, the light bulb just went off with Fiona's question relating to what if somebody shows up at a meeting and refuses to wear a mask? So, you know, they may say that I don't have to wear a mask because I have asthma or anything else. Guess what? They don't have to wear a mask. So, you know, entree Fair Housing Act, and let's make things even a little bit more complicated, especially with regard to wearing masks. Now, there's nothing that I'm aware of regarding the Fair Housing Act that would, well, actually, I shouldn't even say that. Being hard of hearing could also come into play when it comes to social distancing requirements. So, you know, there's so many layers, right? It's like the onion peel analogy. There's so many things that can come into play, but really, that gets back to what Fiona was just impressing upon you when it comes to any type of confrontation. You never really know what you might be dealing with under the layers. So, you know, you always have to just be extremely careful. You can politely ask, but, you know, beware of trying to take matters into your own hands, because you don't want to run afoul of a Fair Housing Act issue when it relates to wearing a mask with an asthma or, you know, other type of disability that could prevent the wearing of a mask.
Yeah, Monique, that is an excellent point. I'm so glad you brought that up, and it kind of really puts it in a nice bow as to why we always say, especially with these types of scenarios, never assume, right? Always treat everybody as you would want to be treated. You know, you can ask the question and then get with your counsel, because you don't want to, you know, you have the best of intentions, but you could be exposing the association to a huge issue.
Yep.
And there are ways to deal with all of these things, but you need your counsel and your management team on board so that everybody's on the same page, and you really want what's best for the entire community. So, okay, we're going to close up. We have a couple of questions regarding rentals, and I'm going to kind of summarize. They're really saying, can the association limit a unit owner renting out his unit because of COVID? And does the association have any responsibility if they did that to compensate the owner?
So my opinion on this, you know, some may disagree, but we talked about those 3 different bundles of rights, and now we're into that free use of property, and both, you know, the constitutional law, state laws, federal laws, very, very protective of an individual's right to use their own property. It's called the free alienability of property. And it is extremely difficult to interfere with those rights. Now that the state restrictions have been lifted, and we reasonably expect, as we've said, the state of emergency to be lifted, I do not think you are going to have the ability to limit a homeowner's right to rent their unit or their home. Other attorneys may disagree with that. And certainly if you do so and we're your counsel, we'll defend you to the absolute best of our ability. But I would say that chances are, if you adopt any rules that are restricting a homeowner's right to rent his or her unit based on the COVID-19 pandemic, and it is challenged at this point in time, now that all of those other executive orders have been lifted, you will probably lose that challenge. I'm going to say more likely than not, you'll be on the losing end of that fight. So I don't think you're going to be able to do that. And the second part of that question, do you have a responsibility to compensate the homeowner? If you're challenged and you lose the challenge, you may very well have to compensate the homeowner for lost rental income. So that's something that you're going to have to be very, very careful with. And I would say, you know, consult your attorneys, whomever your counsel may be, before you try to enact any restrictions that are going to interfere with the access to a unit or a home, the rental of a unit or a home. That, you know, free use of property by a homeowner is a very touchy subject right now, and you're going to be very limited with regard to what you can do under the current state of affairs. We know it's a dangerous virus. We know you want to do what's best to protect your residents, but it's very difficult to limit that bundle of rights under the best of circumstances. And now you don't have the umbrella protection of state action to back you up.
Great. And just to kind of put a bow on that one, we're pretty much out of time. There was a question regarding speaking to full-time owners' rights versus, you know, someone who rents their unit. And in general, there's, you know, there's no difference. The concern the homeowner has is the rental unit is loud, they're partying, et cetera, et cetera. Our guidance would be, you know, there's rules regarding in the association regarding, you know, conduct of any resident, whether they're an owner or a renter. And so you should follow up with the board or the management company with those particular issues, so that, you know, covenants enforcement letters can be sent out and addressed. Right. So that takes all of our time. Monique, thank you so much. You, as always, have been a wealth of information and explained things so plainly and easily that we can all understand them. So we appreciate that.
Except the name of my law firm. I bungled that one pretty well. Somehow I can talk about everything else, but ask me to name myself and forget it. I'm just lost right at that moment.
It's Friday. It's Friday. We'll forgive you. I'm not sure if your partners will, but we forgive you. And to all of our board members that joined today, thank you so much for joining us. And you guys do a great job, and your residents are lucky to have each and every one of you. So pat yourselves on the back, and we hope you'll join us again at our next webinar. Have a great weekend, everybody. Stay safe.
Thank you all. Stay safe. Bye-bye.